One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind 50 years ago. On July 20th, 1969, for the first time, two men landed on a celestial body out of the Earth. Following years, 6 more men landed on our dear satellite, and 12 people in total walked on the moon. Those people were all Americans and astronauts of NASA. Now, I said 3 sentences to you, and in my last sentence, I gave the source of the information. Well, what if this information is not correct? Now, you will say that NASA has invited you to even the rocket launches, so you won't tell us something new out of the official discourse. Therefore, you will make us believe that there had been gone. The ones who have been watching my videos for a long time has surely understood that, I think. I am not only trying to give information, but also trying to show how to reach that information and how to make use of it after you get it. If you come here just to eat the fish, you're screwed. Because here, we're learning how to fish better together so that we cannot go hungry when we're alone. Today's fish is pretty big, so to catch it, first again, we need to ask that question argued for a half century. Was the moon landing real? We never went to the moon. The answer to this question, no, it was fake, was given in that book for the first time. In my previous week's video, I told you that when you search for the conspiracy theories, generally only one resource will show up. Yeah, that resource is this book. It was published 7 years after moon landing in 1976. Again, in the USA. Which means the ones telling they've been to the moon are Americans, while the ones telling it is fake are the same. Americans. The arguments in the book form the basis of the statements coming later about this. NASA didn't have the technology to take the people to the moon in the 60s. The stars aren't seen in the photos taken on the moon. There are also optical anomalies in the same photos. The lunar modules should have generated a big dust cloud after landing. Taking TV equipments to the moon to go a live streaming and running them are impossible there. Because the heat on the surface of the moon is too hot or cold, the cameras of astronauts should have been molten or frozen. Lots of new arguments were added to the ones in the book in years. To talk about all of them now will exceed the time limit of this video. Those arguments have been already replied several times. They were quite convincing. I'm putting them aside, and in this video I want to focus on the topics more important in my opinion. For example, to answer the questions which are more logical, like how did the astronauts pass through the Van Allen radiation belts? Now, let's first start with the technology. NASA had the technology to take the people to the moon in the 60s, guys. Not only Americans, also Russians did. A digital computer was used in Apollo spacecrafts. Actually, it was a primitive computer having 2 kilobytes RAM and 36 kilobytes ROM capacity, which means it cannot compete with the wristwatches of today's. But even so, it was enough for such a duty. If there are some friends among the audience from my generation, if they've watched the demos prepared for Commodore 64, they will remember very well to be able to do big works with small amount of data. Only one person created the animations and music with only 256 bytes code. In this 2-minute, 21-second video, the computer used in the Apollo mission was pretty developed and enough for its era. Also, the spacecrafts were not exactly connected to the computer inside. Besides, this computer already went wrong in Apollo 11 while first landing. However, the landing was carried out. Because the Soviet Union was far behind the USA in terms of the computer technology, they could put a calculator instead of a computer in the moon projects. And even with this method, they could manage to land the Luna 2 down on the moon on September 13th, 1959, 10 years earlier than the Americans could. Yes, you heard it right. The first man-made object to arrive at the moon was sent by the Russians. In short, being able to send a spacecraft and land it, there was possible technologically at those times. The risky and difficult thing was to send the people there. Actually, even that is not. It was that bringing them back as alive to the Earth after sending there. So, do you know what should be asked? Despite these all risks, why have they gone to the moon? And this question has a very simple answer. The war. If If you analyze the history of human, you can see several technological developments. Unfortunately, were made because of the wars. After the World War II, a Cold War period started between the USA and the Soviet Union. These two countries were competing in several areas, and the coolest area of them was the space. Guess who sent the first satellite to the space? The first satellite sent to the space, Sputnik 1, the Soviet Union, 1957. Well, who is the first human going into the space? The first human sent to the space, Yuri Gagarin, the Soviet Union, 1961. The first woman going into the space? The first woman sent to the space, Valentina Tereshkova, the Soviet Union, 1963. I think you can guess what kind of mood the Americans had in this race. While they say, "We missed the space, we need to grab the moon." Just then, again the Russians landed the first object to the moon. To be able to forge ahead at least in one point, they were motivated, so they could do anything to do it. You may think that they set up all this bluff to make people think because of it. You may say all those scenes were shot in the studios, besides directed by Stanley Kubrick, you may say, but you need to prove all of these because the opponent side says, "We went to the moon. We took these shots. We did those. Also, we carried stones almost a half of a ton, and they present us all of these as proofs." Well, how can we pull off this? By looking at the other sides, by searching for independent proofs. What I will show you now will be based on the observations exactly independent from NASA. Let's start with the Japanese. I have already talked about their space agency JAXA. In 2008, they sent a spacecraft called Selene to the orbit of the moon. With it, by scanning the surface of the moon for almost 2 years, they created the 3D images of it. One of these images is this. This is not a photo. It is a surface image consisted of 3D images scanned. Apollo astronauts went to the same point on the 2nd of August in 1971 and took these photos. There is a white area on the hill at the back in both images. That area is the small crater occurred because of the motor of the module landing on the moon. So, one of the arguments from the book I mentioned at the beginning of the video was exactly disproved in 2008 by the Japaneses that the USA sent atom bombs to 2 cities of them and killed thousands of people in the World War II. Well, might there be a mistake? Of course. But later the same area was again observed through the spacecraft called Chandrayaan-1 that India sent. And one more map was created in low resolution. In 2010, the Chinese sent the Chang'e 2 spacecraft and created one more map. All the observations coming from all of these countries match with the ones the USA presents. Actually, if there is any discrepancy with it, notably the Chinese will all these proofs with the whole world. Okay, there may be a little chance, but let's say that these governments made an agreement among themselves and told us this big lie altogether. But there are personal observations independent from all of these governments. The observations made via telescopes. The first people indeed went to the moon via the Apollo 8 mission 1 year earlier than 1969, but they didn't land there. On December 21st, 1968, amateur astronomers from the different points of the world managed monitoring various phases of this mission. Later, in missions of Apollo 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, lots of similar images were detected too. The people independent of each other acquired signals through the homemade radio equipments from the control module in the orbit of the moon, during the missions of Apollo 15 and 16. Meanwhile, the Russians far behind in the space race were following these developments closely, with their well-developed equipments and intelligence devices which are cutting edge in the world. As you also guess, by this time, no statement was made by the Russian official authorities about fake landing. So far, we talked about the proofs confirmed by the resources independent from NASA, as I said before. On the other hand, NASA continues making new observations, and the results of these observations haven't changed their statements for 50 years. The satellite LRO orbiting the moon is scanning the highest resolution of it. This satellite monitorized the places that Apollo 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17 landed in a high resolution. Now you may ask why there is no Apollo 13. Because it had to turn back to the Earth due to a malfunction while the mission without landing. This photo showing an area nearly 500 meters width was taken by the LRO satellite in 2009. It shows the landing area of Apollo 17 to take the last people walking on the moon. The spot in the middle is where they landed. While turning back, it was launched from the same place, and the launcher stayed on the moon. On the right, the rover carrying the astronauts on the moon is seen at the last place as parked. The photo taken from that point is this. In the update photo taken by the satellite, the tire tracks of the device on the moon can be seen besides the footprints of the astronauts. I was strolling on the moon one day. That is the video showing how those footprints were done there. The song of the melody they're singing is actually I was strolling through the park one day, but they have changed the lyrics with the moon. On the left of the photo, you may see a rock. There are various equipments near it. These are called as ALSEP and were used in the experiments done on the moon. Now, speaking of the experiments, one of them is the reflectors left on the surface. These reflectors are still there, and they were used for calculating the distance to the moon sensitively in the observations made on the Earth for years. Some experiments on the moon continued on the Earth. In the landings of the Apollo program of 6 people in total, 380 kilos of lunar rock was collected and brought to the Earth. They were not only brought, but also have been analyzed by the scientists for 50 years. All of the scientific publications as a result of these confirm that these rocks were brought from the moon. This stone, taken in the Apollo 15 mission from the surface of the moon, was calculated as 4.46 billion years old, which means it is 200 million years older than the oldest rock on the Earth found so far. Well, why not these rocks were collected and brought by the robots instead of the humans sent there? The Soviet Union managed to bring the lunar rock with this way. Or today, it is also possible to collect and bring samples from Mars or other celestial bodies with the robotic missions. Possible, but we are talking about 380 kilos of rocks, almost a half ton. To bring them like that is impossible. The Soviet Union in the Luna 16, 20, and 24 missions, get ready for this, could bring only 326 grams of rocks in total. Gram? It is less than even 1 in 1,000. NASA in the unmanned missions to the Mars could collect 500 grams of samples. To bring 380 kilos of rocks to the Earth with the robotic missions, it is calculated to go to the moon and come back about 2,000 times. Now let's move to the Van Allen belts. There is a zone around the world arising from the magnetic fields. This zone full of energetic particles consists of 2 radiative belts. How did the astronauts survive while going to the moon despite passing through these zones? Now, first for this, we need to understand how the radiation belts occur. Remember we mentioned energetic particles. What did they mean? Particles such as proton, neutron, and electron, forming the atom, depart from each other through the nuclear reactions in the sun and spread every which way of the universe as solar winds. Of course, they arrive at our Earth as well. Because these particles are positively or negatively charged, they interact with the magnetic field of the Earth. Some of them reaches at the atmosphere from the north or south poles and creates views called as aurora borealis, which are nice to watch. The others accumulate around the Earth as belts, or bands confined to the magnetic fields like these. Red sections are the densest ones of particles. The first 2 fields are called inner and outer belts, and they are always there. The third and the biggest belt arises while the big solar flares and it disappears later. So it is a temporal zone. As you see, these belts are so thick, especially around the equatorial orbit of the Earth, but they get thinner towards the poles. During the Apollo missions, the periods which the solar flares don't exist. So the biggest zone didn't occur were chosen. No passing through the inner belt in the route to the moon, and the thinnest zones of the second belt were determined. But still, astronauts were exposed to a certain amount of radiation for 3.5 hours while going and 2.5 hours on the way back. All astronauts had dosimeters, and during the flight measurements were always carried out. As a result, they were exposed to average 0.80 REM radiation. Well, what does this mean? Today in the world, the personnel working in the nuclear reactors are exposed to about 5 REM radiation in a year. And we let that happen, even in the Apollo 14 mission, which has the highest exposure. 1.14 REM radiation was detected. This amount equals the radiation that we all have in 3 years. And by the way, even Van Allen, who discovered the Van Allen belts, laughed at the thesis about impossibility of passing over them because he was alive at that time, and he described all these arguments as bullshit. Well, since 1972, why did no one go to the moon again? And why do we have activities recently to go there? There is a simple answer too, the same with the answer that I gave at the beginning of the video. The war. In the last 30 to 40 years, we are living in a monopolar world almost. In the previous century, with the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the Cold War period ended as well. No other superpower threatening the USA's power came up. However, in this century we live in, there is a superpower like that. China. There is also a war between China and the USA. The history books will write this not a Cold War, but a trade war. China put their own moon program Chang'e into practice officially in 2007.